Has it ever happened to you noticing that there's a bird that simply won't leave your yard? It shows up almost every day, lands in the same spot, stays there watching you, as if it's waiting for something. And the more you notice it, the stranger it gets. Because it's not just a random visit. It feels like a recurring behavior, almost intentional. Now tell me, has this ever happened to you? Maybe you ignored it at first. You figured it was just a coincidence, just another random bird passing through your space. But then it came back, and came back again, always at the same time, the same spot, with that same attentive gaze. And suddenly, without even realizing it, you start asking yourself, why won't this bird leave? The most curious part is that this kind of animal behavior isn't as rare as it seems. People all over the world report similar situations: birds that get close, that watch, that return with unusual frequency, as if they had chosen that place, or even that specific person. And that's when different interpretations start to emerge. Some think it's good luck, others see it as something symbolic, almost spiritual. But is there a more concrete explanation behind all of this? What you're about to discover might surprise you, because behind this simple habit of a bird staying in your yard, there could be something far more complex involving animal behavior, memory, environmental adaptation, and even interaction with humans. Yes, interaction. It might sound like an exaggeration, but science has already shown that many birds are far more intelligent and observant than we tend to think. Now think about this with me. What if that bird isn't there by accident? What if it has a specific reason to keep coming back? It could be something in your environment, in your routine, or even in you. Sounds strange? It might even seem like too much of a coincidence to just be a coincidence. And the more you start paying attention, the more details appear. The way it positions itself, how long it stays, the direction of its gaze. All of that can say far more than it seems at first glance. It's as if that small visitor is, in some way, building a routine around you. And then comes that question you just can't shake. What exactly is going on here? Stay with me until the end, because what looks like just a common bird in your yard might be hiding a fascinating and little-known behavior from the animal world. And once you understand it, you may never look at these seemingly simple everyday encounters the same way again. Because the truth is that nature is always communicating, even when we don't notice. And in this specific case, there might be a much more interesting and even surprising reason behind that bird that keeps refusing to leave. And maybe, while you're sitting there trying to understand this curious behavior, there's something even more interesting happening. You're not alone in this. Many people have gone through this exact same situation, but almost nobody talks about it. Sometimes because it feels strange, sometimes because they can't find a clear explanation. But that's precisely where things get more interesting. Because when different people start observing the same kind of behavior in birds, it stops being a coincidence and starts becoming a pattern. So tell me something. Does this topic resonate with you? Have you ever had a similar experience? A bird that seemed to be watching you, that kept coming back, or that acted in an unusual way? If so, leave it in the comments. Seriously, it might seem simple, but sharing that helps not only enrich this conversation, but could also reveal something that other people have been trying to understand for a long time. And if at any point you thought, wow, I had never stopped to notice that, go ahead and leave a like. It shows that this kind of content is genuinely worth continuing to explore. It might seem like a small gesture, but it makes an enormous difference in helping more people discover this kind of curiosity about animal behavior, the kind that, deep down, changes the way we see the world around us. And of course, if you like this idea of uncovering the hidden mysteries in the simplest things in daily life, like a bird in your yard, consider subscribing to the channel, because there's so much more that we overlook every single day, and it can be far deeper than it appears. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. And the more people observing, commenting, and sharing experiences, the more we're able to piece things together and truly understand what's really going on. Now, going back to that bird that won't leave, there's one important detail that almost nobody notices, but that can explain a big part of this behavior. The mystery that repeats itself right before your eyes, because when you start paying closer attention, you realize that this kind of situation isn't isolated. It's part of a much larger pattern. There are countless accounts from people who notice birds showing up at the same time every day, occupying the exact same spot in the yard, or even quietly following certain human movements. It's not uncommon for someone to say they feel like they're being watched, not in a threatening way, but in a curious one, almost like a constant presence. And that completely changes the way we interpret what's happening. What once seemed like a random event starts to gain context, almost as if there are invisible forces guiding this behavior behind the scenes. That's where many people find themselves in a kind of internal conflict. Is it just a coincidence? Or is there a hidden truth behind all of this? Some people try to explain it rationally, others prefer to see it as something more symbolic, almost like a sign. But regardless of the interpretation, there's one thing all these experiences have in common: the impact they leave. Because when a pattern repeats itself, it shifts our perception, our mindset, the way we decide what to ignore, and what to start observing more carefully. And the more you notice these details, the more it seems like a kind of silent journey is unfolding right before your eyes. A subtle but continuous interaction between animal behavior and your own environment, as if that bird has, in some way, become integrated into your routine, even without you having noticed at first. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because there's a specific factor that explains why these birds choose certain places and certain people, and it might completely change the way you see the situation. WH80 Nobody tells you about their territory. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because behind this behavior that seems so strange, there's a logic far more structured than most people imagine. Birds aren't just passing the time when they stay in the same spot. They're making decisions, constantly strategic, decisions tied to survival, safety, and adaptation. And here's a key point: birds are extremely territorial. That means when they find an environment that offers shelter, food, and low predator threat, they tend to repeat that pattern. Your yard, for example, might be seen as a true refuge, a space where everything feels under control, where risk is lower and the chances of survival are higher. It's almost like a safe zone within that animal's journey. But the most interesting part lies behind the scenes, because it's not just about the physical space. It's about consistency, predictability, the pattern that forms over time, and that has a direct impact on how that bird starts to behave in that environment. But there's one detail that completely shifts this interpretation. If it were only about territory, it would be there, but not necessarily paying attention to you. Not necessarily watching your movements, your routine, your presence. And that's exactly where most people sense that something different is going on, because it doesn't feel like just a choice of location. It feels like a directed choice. And when this kind of behavior starts to repeat itself, it triggers a kind of alert in our perception, as if there's a hidden truth right there, something not yet fully revealed. And that generates a natural, almost instinctive curiosity to understand what's really behind all of this. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about a bird in your yard. It's about the meaning behind that repetition. When IT truly starts to recognize you now, I want to go even deeper into this, because this is where everything shifts to another level. We're no longer just talking about territory or a safe environment. We're talking about perception, memory, and recognition. It might seem like an exaggeration at first, but there are already studies showing that many birds have the ability to recognize human faces. Yes, actually recognize them, to tell people apart, to remember who represents a threat and who is part of a safe routine. And when you understand that, the situation of the bird in your yard takes on a whole new layer of meaning, because it's not just about where it is. It's about who is there. Birds build associations all the time. If at some point you were present while it felt safe, or if the environment around you conveyed stability, that gets registered. It's like a mental map being built, full of reference points, and within that map, you may have become a fixed point that completely changes the way you see this interaction. Suddenly, that constant gaze no longer seems random. That recurring presence stops feeling like just a habit and starts feeling like a choice based on past experience. There's an invisible logic playing out behind the scenes, guiding this behavior quietly, but with extraordinary precision. And the impact of that is greater than it appears. Because when you realize that a wild animal can, in a way, recognize you within its own routine, it triggers a shift in your own mindset. It makes you question how much you truly understand about the world around you, and how much is still going unnoticed. In other words, it's not just that it's in your yard, it may literally know who you are. And if that's true, then there's something even deeper happening in this relationship, something most people never even imagine, something that goes beyond basic instinct and enters the realm of connections built over time. The connection you never realized was being formed. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because here is the point that surprises people most when everything starts to click. It's not just about territory, and it's not only about recognition. There's something more subtle happening, something that builds slowly, almost invisibly, but with a very real impact. That bird might simply be curious about you. Yes, curious, watching your movements, your schedule, your patterns. To it, you're also part of the environment, just like a tree, a wall, or any other fixed element, but with one key difference. You move, you react, you change. And that draws attention. Over time, that observation can turn into routine. And that's where everything takes on a new dimension. Because when an animal starts including you in its own routine, it's not random. It's an adaptation, a decision based on repetition, experience, and perception. It begins to anticipate your presence, to understand your behavior, almost as if it's following its own journey alongside yours. In some rarer cases, it goes even further. There are situations where birds show signs of indirect interaction, small gestures, shifts in position, controlled approaches, as if they're testing boundaries, figuring out how close they can get. It's not communication in the human sense, but it is a form of connection within their own logic. And here is the hidden truth that changes everything. It's not that it chose you in some magical or inexplicable way, but there is, in fact, a connection that has been built. A relationship based on repetition, safety, and mutual perception, even if silent. And when you start seeing it that way, that simple scene of a bird in the yard stops being ordinary and becomes part of something much deeper, almost like a backstage of nature unfolding right before your eyes. When you realize it was never a coincidence. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because after everything we've covered, maybe the greatest revelation isn't in the bird's behavior, but in the way you start to see the situation. Maybe that bird isn't just sitting there. Maybe it's part of something bigger, part of a dynamic that has always existed, but went unnoticed until now. Because, deep down, we've been conditioned to ignore these small everyday signals, to treat as irrelevant anything that doesn't seem to have an immediate impact. But when you shift that mindset, everything starts to take on a different meaning. What if, in some way, you are also part of its world? It might seem like a distant idea at first, but when there's repetition, observation, and adaptation on both sides, that line starts to blur. It's not about humanizing the animal. It's about understanding that a real interaction is happening, even if silent, even if subtle. That brings about a transformation in the way you make simple decisions, like choosing to observe more, to notice more, to question more. Because what once seemed like mere background scenery might actually be an active part of a story unfolding behind the scenes. The hidden truth here is simple but powerful. Nature is interacting with you all the time. All the time. It's just that, most of the time, we don't notice. And maybe, starting now, you will. And if you made it this far, it's because, in some way, this topic kept you hooked. Maybe out of curiosity, maybe because it resonated, or maybe because something inside you said, there's more going on here than meets the eye. If this kind of content speaks to you, consider subscribing to the channel. The whole idea here is to keep exploring these small everyday situations that carry bigger meanings, almost like revelations hidden in the simplest details. Now tell me something. Have you ever had the feeling that an animal was really watching you in a different way? Leave it in the comments, because sharing those experiences opens up this perspective we've been building together even further. And if at any moment during this video, you felt that connection, like everything was starting to click, leave a like. It helps this kind of content reach more people who are also ready to see beyond the obvious. And there's a video right over there that perfectly complements everything we talked about here. Click on it and keep going with me, because this journey of awareness goes much, much further.